Hey peers, welcome back to the Modern Myths Podcast. I'm Vince Ventura, host of the Modern Myths Podcast and artistic director of 12 Piers Theater. This week we have an interview with Judith Pratt, playwright of Spiraling. Judith is an artist with a diverse career in the theater and a lot to say about the art form. Judith and I talk about myth and ritual and its place in the theater, her playwriting process, and she gives some advice to aspiring young artists. This is an interview you won't want to miss. And now, here is my interview with Judith Pratt, playwright of Spiraling. So, welcome, Judith. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, I'm glad to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. So, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and, when did you start writing plays?
Let's see. I've lived in Ithaca since 1983. I grew up in the Boston area. I come from a very old New England family. Although, having spent my formative years in Maryland, I had to learn how to talk like my father. I mostly don't sound like that. My husband used to be a stage manager and is now a computer geek. We don't have children, but we have two cockatiels, which you may hear chirping in the background.
I think I just heard one now.
He's helping.
When did you start writing plays?
The first play I wrote in 94, 95. I'd done a whole lot of things before that. Actor, mime, graduate school, voice movement professor, theater history professor, director. And I was in a group, actually this is kind of interesting, I was in a group created by Arthur Lithgow, whose son is named John Lithgow.
I've heard of him.
Yes, and Arthur had family here and came to Ithaca for a while and started a playwriting group and wanted actors. So I was acting. And I kind of did the chorus line thing, I could do that. And there were a couple of other women in the group who were interested in writing. So we formed a group, Third Floor Productions. And I wrote my first play, which is called Chimera. And we produced it because, actor, director, you think, oh, well, I have to see what it looks like. So Third Floor Productions produced it. And there I was, writing plays.
So what kind of stories do you like to tell in the theater? What kind of play do you typically write?
It pretty much always has a woman protagonist or several. I discovered at some point I kept writing plays about three women. Chimera was one, and then there were some shorter pieces. And Chimera was a fantasy. I'm very interested in fantasy, not so much heavy science fiction, although I read a lot of that too, but and not Dungeons and Dragons, but
I think fantasy as well as myth has a great way of taking what we're afraid of or maybe what we're hopeful for and repackaging it in a way that's a little more digestible.
Yes, I like that. And isn't sort of didactic, telling you everything that's wrong with the world, which we all know, but giving you another way to think about it and look at it.
And I think that's specifically good fantasy. A bad fantasy can easily fall into the trap of being didactic for sure.
Yes, or just pure escapism. And I'm very good at escapism.
There has to be some substance.
Yeah, at some point I was reading romance novels and I had to give it up because they're too crappy.
What inspired you to write Spiraling, which I think is a great example of a myth or a fantasy that doesn't tell us how we should feel at the end, but maybe does provide some guidance in how to engage with our natural life cycle in a positive way?
Actually, it started out completely differently. When I was teaching voice and movement, I taught mask work. I taught the system that was created by this French teacher named Jacques Lecoq, who also taught Marcel Marceau, who didn't use masks. But this tradition is a way of teaching actors how to really use their bodies to express a character because you put on a mask. The mask is a character. You become the character of the mask. So I love them. And at some point I thought masks and the study of masks and the art of masks, and it sort of started out at an art museum, which, no, that wasn't it. And then I had this, notion of masks that came from some indigenous tribe. And I read a whole lot of myths from a lot of different groups. And I looked at masks from a lot of different groups, really Africa and Pacific Northwest are the two that really sort of inspired me. And I'm thinking, all right, which one of these groups shall I use and how will I do that? And one of my fellow playwrights said, well, just make it up. And it was, the whack on the side of the head inspiration.
Take a page out of George Lucas's book and make up a religion.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think it's useful because while it still feels real, it still feels like a complete mythology, but it could be tailored to make the points thematically that you were trying to make.
Yes, and I have no idea where that came from. I talk to people about my writing, and there's always a point where I think, I don't know where I got that idea.
I think that's one of the most beautiful things of being an artist. Oftentimes when I'm directing, I feel this, scientifically it's called flow, where you're in the moment and everything is clicking and you are a function of your art almost. The self kind of goes to the side.
Yes.
Do you have plans going forward for the play? Is it something that will continue to grow?
Well, I have to say that working with Abby and Ingrid, I really got exactly what I needed at this point in the play's life, which is fixing the devilish details. And then I listened to the podcast, and I will listen to it about 25 times because there's nothing like hearing actors say your words. I always say it's, you take your play to your playwrights group and you listen and you say, well, that's not it. And then I'm sure that playwrights who are on Broadway are standing in the back of the auditorium going, oh, I got to rewrite this.
It's like you're never done. You sometimes just have to abandon it. It's just time to put it up.
Yes. So, at this point, it will make all the rounds of theaters, and it will be very cool to have the podcast.
We think this is a really interesting tool, and I'm really happy to hear that it was a helpful process for you. We think it's a really interesting tool for submissions, and we don't expect submission criteria to change overnight, but I hope as an artistic director that people start sending me some of these recorded plays or podcast versions of plays. We hope that this can be a new form of not only getting people interested in the theater as an audience member, but a new way for artistic directors to get interested in plays that might not have been produced yet.
And get interested. People won't go to new work. It's scary for them. But if you can listen to it and you can say, oh, I would like to see this.
Sure. Tell me a little bit about your view of myth and how maybe theater can contribute to a new global mythology.
Wow. Theater should be myth. Theater started in myth and ritual, or as we used to say in grad school, rith and ritual, because it's such a, if you study theater history, it's just like this mantra, myth and ritual, myth and ritual. But I'll be awful here. I don't really like theater that's just, kitchen sink drama. Here's this family and they're all meeting for some reason and there's a big secret and bang. I like Buried Child. I like theater that tells us something beyond what we'd ever think of. We think about our families, we think about political problems, but do we think about myth and fantasy? No, we don't. And I like that.
I like it too. You name drop Joseph Campbell in Spiraling, and I think that for me the logical conclusion might be that myth lets us have a sort of guide in following our bliss.
Yes. Well, and that's what I'm doing in spiraling. It's like, Jill, how do I find my way through this new world for young women where we're still women, but we're supposed to be just like men, but that isn't going to work because we're women. How do I do it? And she can't figure it out. And the myth helps her.
It seems like the rituals are very important to Jill. And in some ways, I would say Meredith and Emma. How do you see a contemporary theater honoring those rituals? And why is it important to keep them alive?
Wow. We are a more secular society now, but it doesn't mean that we have lost our need for ritual. And in Ithaca is a very, it's where old hippies go to die, and we're very leftist, and there's people all over Ithaca who they do solstice rituals and they do drumming rituals, and it's that, human instinct and need for a ritual. And if you're not going to a church or synagogue or a mosque, then where's your ritual? And then you find it somewhere else. And I think in spiraling, I was exploring that way that white Western culture has of sort of appropriating rituals from other cultures in this search for something, as Jill says, bigger than ourselves.
How do you connect to that group consciousness, and how do you connect to a general greater spirituality, without these structured rituals? I think the function of a theater and the function of a church are very, very similar.
Asian theater is all about ritual. The Greeks were all about ritual. The medieval theater was all about Christian religion. I mean, it's just built in. You're right. You're absolutely right. That's where I go for inspiration and solace, and sometimes getting furious. I always ask, why did the playwright break the silence of the universe?
I think that's a really great question to ask. When I'm choosing material, I think, why does this story need to be told on stage? Or how can this story be presented as an audio work? But why did the playwright break the silence of the universe? It sure takes a lot of effort to break that inertia, so hopefully it's a good reason that they're breaking that silence.
Yeah.
Well, I have one last important question for you. And Judith, thank you so much for taking this time out of your day. You've been a wonderful interviewee and a wonderful playwright to work with. This has been a fantastic process. And being that you're such a wonderful playwright to work with, what advice would you give to a young performer or a young playwright who may be just entering the business, coming out of school, or wants to get started?
Well, especially for a writer, just write. Just do it. In her book, Bird by Bird, Anne Lamott, she says, write a shitty first draft. And you just write it. And
I love it.
That person on your shoulder to shut up, you're writing. But the other thing I would say is go somewhere where there's a lot of people doing theater. Doesn't have to be New York. Chicago is good. It sounds like Philadelphia is good. Boston is good. Just go somewhere where a lot of people are doing theater and find them, hang around with them, go to their shows, talk to the people who are doing the work, only connect, and keep doing it. And it's hard, you're trying to make a living. You're in a big city. I've done that. But you just have to not let the daily grind stop you from doing whatever your art is, from taking acting classes, from taking dance or singing classes, whatever you're doing, from finding a group of writers that you can hang out with and, can read each other's work. And
I love that advice. Work hard and persevere. and it's bound to come through for you.
Well, and it'll come through somehow. I mean, you may not become rich and famous, but I mean, I keep sort of switching from one thing to another. I think I may have a short attention span or something, but I wouldn't have missed any of it.
The time I spent as an actor has definitely made me that much better of a director.
Yes, and especially as a playwright, you gotta hang out with actors and directors, and if you're coming to playwriting as only a writer, you've got to probably take an acting class.
Well, it's been such a pleasure working with you. I want to close by saying that this is a play that I am so proud of. I'm so proud to be involved with it, and I hope that you take it and make it amazing and get it produced all over the world, because I think it is something that should be heard. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Modern Myths Podcast. Join us next week where we take your questions from Facebook and Twitter. The Modern Myths Podcast is produced by 12 Piers Theater. Executive producer Vince Ventura. Producers Sarah Fisher, Matt Henderson, and Marcus Savage. Dramaturg Abigail Caddy. Spiraling was directed by Ingrid Sonishin. The cast in order of appearance: Jill, played by Erica Cuenca. Meredith, played by Virginia Grunert. Emma, played by Cara Ronzetti. Stage directions read by James Fitzgerald. Recording location generously provided by Carnegie Mellon University. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review.